Hello and welcome to this new member interview. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Laura Gelder Robertson, who goes as Loz, and she is from Glow Innovation. And I'm just going to kick straight off with the question I ask everyone, which is, Loz, why did you decide to take the Million Tree Pledge?
That's a great question. And I knew a couple of the other Million Tree Pledges. So I knew Sam Sindel, and he told me about you, Marcus. Oh. And every time I talked to Sam, coming off the back of having studied at Cambridge University's Sustainable Institute for Sustainable Leadership, everything Sam was talking about was about 100 times more ambitious than what I had in my head. And one day he told me about the Million Tree Pledge and how many trees Propeller Net were planting, and I was like, wow, that's insane. And I just got thinking, I'm a one-woman band, but why couldn't I be that ambitious? And so I was sort of debating it with him, and I said, well, why don't I pitch to the group and say, look, it's just me, I haven't got the assets to plant 1 million trees right now, but I could probably plant 100,000, and I could probably find 9 other small businesses that would be up for forming a cooperative. So what if we did some kind of cooperative, collective forest so that micro businesses could also join in the pledge, not just small businesses and medium-sized ones? And came in and the group went, all right, then we'll give it a go. So on the first Monday of COP, I sort of threw down the gauntlet and said, okay, I am going to spend my entire life savings, because that's what it effectively was. I'm going to plant 100,000 trees in mangrove trees in Mozambique and Madagascar, in places, parts of the world that really need it. And got a really warm response from that, from my Cambridge alumni, some of the really big businesses there. We've got some, people who are high up in sustainability in major banks, in retailers, in corporates, multinationally, and they were just kind of a little bit gobsmacked. They were kind of like, wow, if one person has just pledged 100,000 trees, that sort of makes the 1 million trees that we planted last year pale into insignificance. So I need to think about this. I'm going to go to my directors and we're going to up our ambition. I was like, excellent. That's exactly why we're doing it. It's all about the scale. It's about massively amping up the ambition so that we accelerate the nature-based solutions and get as many trees planted towards net zero. I was up at COP26 and I was doing a little exhibition with the Million Tree Pledge. I said to Sam, I'd love to get other people involved in this. It's COP26. Why don't we see if we can get another 100,000 trees planted by the end of COP? And so I put a shout out on Nature Day on day 6 and said, look, anyone else that wants to plant, 1,000 trees, costs £124. That's a lot of money, right? But if you look at how important planting trees are, if we're going to get any kind of drawdown, while we need it in the next decisive decade, we need to plant them now. Yeah. So, anyone that wants to jump in, get involved, and let's see if we can plant 100,000 trees. Didn't quite make the 100,000, but we've got 55,500 additional trees planted from individuals, from small business owners, from people who are just looking at that level of ambition. And one of my colleagues said, oh, no, you won't get 100,000. You should just put 10,000. I was like, I know I won't get 100,000, but if I ask for 100,000, I might get 20,000. And then we ended up getting lots more. So I think it's about throwing down a gauntlet to all businesses that says, this is how ambitious. There's a reason why we're being this ambitious, because time isn't on our side. And because when you're investing and trying to mitigate the physical effects of climate change in the parts of the world that are already suffering, we need to crack on and do that now. We haven't got time to waste. Trees take time to obviously grow and mature and really get into sequestering carbon. So there is no time like the present. So that's a long answer to a short question, Marcus.
It's a brilliant answer, because the thing that everyone's probably thinking, and I'm certainly thinking, is you're actually treating this as if it is an emergency. Because I feel there's so much, I don't even call it greenwash, but people saying, I'm just going to do my bit or do a little bit. But you're like, no, the house is on fire. I just need to throw everything at it. And, for a one-woman band to take essentially all of her savings, put it in, and then start shouting about it to get other people to think bigger, that's exactly the sort of radical action that we need. Because if we, I'm really inspired by your story, others will be as well. And if everyone starts doing something like that, doesn't have to be their entire life saving, but thinking bigger and thinking about what's possible, then imagine where we'd be. Yeah, that's something that's incredible.
Absolutely. And there's a couple of things that just makes me think. I mean, one is just to answer the emergency part. It is absolutely an emergency. And I think about 18 months ago, I was doing some innovation work with an amazing social and environmental justice organization called United Edge. And as part of that, they do a 6-month online course with about 250 participants from around the world, but they're largely from Africa and Asia. And during those 6 weeks, I heard so many stories of incredible work that other social enterprises, NGOs, charities, small business startups were doing at the front line of climate change. And it quickly became apparent that a lot of simple everyday activities that I was doing were directly having a negative impact in parts of the world that were suffering from climate change. And I think sometimes it can feel, if you live in a temperate climate like the UK, as if climate change sort of isn't happening, as if it's going to come in the future. And so it's easy to forget it is very real and has been for the last 2 decades in anywhere that's close to the equator, in many parts of the world that are coastal, that are already feeling the effects of increased hurricanes, sea level rising, flooding, extreme heat, all of those effects. So, you know, it's not some far off future problem. It is happening now. And I feel a real responsibility to draw down my lifetime emissions. And we can come on to that in a second. But I think also the flip side of it is taking responsibility as an adult on this planet for drawing down my lifetime emissions. You know, if I can do something that is so extreme, it will obviously hopefully stretch other people to do more than they would have done. It makes people curious as to why I'm doing it, which helps to link into the fact it is urgent. If you look at the latest science coming out of the IPCC report and the amazing carbon clock that I was sharing with you last week from the McCarthy Research Institute, that's literally counting down. You know, we have 7 years and 8 months to stay within a 1.5 degree world, because the carbon clock's basically counting down how much more carbon we can keep emitting before we trigger irreversible climatic tipping points. Now, that's a 1.5 degree world. A lot of people are still probably thinking in terms of a 2 degree world. I've studied the climate science and I know the difference between those two realities. And for me, the 1.5 degree world is by far the most important place to stay. There's a reason that the Paris Climate Agreement was trying to set equitably trying to set a 1.5 degree time frame. So that's important to me. But even on the school run at school, last week I was having a chat with one of the mums who was going, oh, you know, I didn't quite have the budget to plant 1,000 trees, but I'm thinking about it. And I was like, you could plant 25 trees. You could plant a copse of 25 trees as a child forest within my parent forest. So you start your own forest and we just link it in, and it cost you £3.10. That's the price of a cup of coffee. So instead of going out for a cup of coffee next week, plant 25 trees in a part of the world that really, really will benefit from it. How good would that feel? And she was amazed. She was like, really? Only £3.10? I was like, yeah, you know, you don't have to, it's about doing the maximum you can do. So I'm not trying to make an assumption that everyone will want to go to the lengths that I'm going to. Whatever is the most you can do. We call it the hummingbird mindset. You know, that's what we're aiming for. If everyone did the maximum that they could do, then we're far more likely to resolve the climate crisis and reverse the effects of climate change, because we know we can. We have all the science, we have all the solutions, we actually have all the money. It's just unevenly distributed. So I just want to sort of galvanize people and educate them and sort of raise their awareness as to what they can do, because it's actually very simple. From your armchair, you can do something that is incredibly impactful, and that will increasingly get more impactful as those trees mature.
I mean, I think the word you said there, which stands out, is educate people, because I think it's not from lack of wanting. It's just not knowing that I can go to a website like Ecology, or I can go straight to Eden Reforestation, and from 8 to 12 pence a tree, plant a tree. You know, it is that much little money. I think people probably think it's £10 a tree or whatever. And then it's also, I want to pick up on the lifetime emissions, because we were discussing this before I press record. I've done a bit of sort of just very broad sort of number crunching over the weekend and saying, okay, well, if you want to draw down your lifetime emissions, i.e. clean up the mess that you're responsible for, well, first you need to work out what your lifetime emissions are. And a very crude way of doing that, which is probably about right, is to times your age by 10. So I'm 37, so it's 370 tons of CO2, which, when you think about it, that's a lot of tons, right? If my car's about 1.5 tons, that's quite a few cars just sitting in the atmosphere that need to come down. But looking at sort of what the mangrove trees that we plant via ecology, what they draw down, I worked out that for every 30 years I've been alive, I need to plant about 2,000 trees. And those 2,000 trees over 25 years will sequester 30 years worth of 300 tons of CO2. So that isn't a huge amount of money, really. I mean, 2,000 trees, we're looking at, what's that, about 220 pounds?
Yeah.
And obviously, not everyone can afford that. I think, if we're getting interviewed now by some right-wing shock jock saying, well, working people can't afford an extra 200 quid. It's only a one-off 200 quid, right, if you're 30. But that's where I think where you're throwing down the gauntlet is so impressive, because you're not saying, hey, I'm just doing my lifetime. I mean, you're doing thousands of people's lifetime emissions with your collective forest getting to 1 million trees. I mean, that's going to be, around 1,000 people, right? Lifetime emissions, depending on how old they are and the average age. But that's a lot of people. And I think that's always been a mission behind the Million Tree Pledge, is to go beyond. It's not just, because I think we can't solve this crisis if people who have means say, well, I'll just do my little bit and then that's it. For me, there's sort of this analogy of we're in this sinking ship, and it's like people, I'm just standing next to a certain size hole and bailing out that bit, but I've got a massive bucket.
Yeah, it's such a cute point, because I think sometimes even I can fall into this habit of trying to solve climate change in isolation, because I'm a one-woman band. I spend a lot of time, obviously interacting with my associates and my clients, but what I love about the Million Tree Pledge is we're a collective. So I'm already part of a group of 30 people who mean business and who meet every fortnight and talk about how we can ramp up what we're doing and just amplify our voice so that more people are aware of it, and we can just sow those seeds. And when I talked about the hummingbird mindset previously, what I love about that is, the hummingbird is the smallest bird in the forest, and the metaphor that I've been using at COP26 and that I'm carrying forward with Low Carbon Leaders, which is an initiative that Sam Sindel, who's also part of the Million Tree Pledge, has set up, that I'm part of, is, it's the smallest tree in the forest, but if you imagine lots of hummingbirds swarming together, even if they can only carry that one little droplet of water in their beak, they are facing up to all the other animals in the forest, in the story of the hummingbird and the forest fire, and kind of saying, hippo, you've got a massive mouth. Elephant, you've got a huge trunk that you could fill full of gallons of water. If we all swarm, if the hummingbirds swarm, and if we as a collective group of animals in the world swarm, we can put the fire out. So I love this analogy of, however small you think you are, however insignificant you think your action might be, if 1 million other people are doing it, it's going to be massive. And so, part of GLOW, part of what Low Carbon Leaders is on a mission to do, is to get 1 million small businesses to net zero by 2025. And the workshops that we ran during COP26 were called How to Do It in 6 months. Now, it's probably, with the state of play for small businesses in particular who hit lots of different roadblocks, it's quite technically difficult to get rid of all your emissions by 2025 until the government, some of the infrastructure is in place and some more of the subsidies and incentives are in place. So small businesses almost have to form collaborative alliances in order to work around the roadblocks that they're going to hit, because the structure isn't quite in place for them to do everything they need to do. But they can get creative, and they are much, much smaller, able to move and think much more quickly, because they don't have the complexity and the cost that a really big business, I think of the analogy of the oil tanker turning versus the nippy little speedboat. So, there is some beauty in individuals and in smaller businesses who can actually change their point of view and do things very quickly, swarming. And the scale of that, if we can really wrap it up, actually being as impactful as big businesses doing their bit and, turning the oil tanker. Because what we have to do is accelerate. The two biggest things that came out of COP for me were the need to not just collaborate, but really accelerate. And I liken the analogy to almost like climbing the biggest mountain of our lives. And I'm a kind of Sherpa who's put my hand up, and I don't honestly know how we're going to get to the top, but I know that I need to take a lead. And that if I give other people a leg up, so we sort of took that symbol that you often do for collaboration of like people holding hands, and we sort of I'm not doing this right, that way. We tilted it as if you were giving someone a hand, you're climbing up a rocky bit of a mountain. It was that feeling of that's what we need to be doing. Whenever anyone is talking to you about they've hit a roadblock or they can't engage with planting trees because, is there something you could do that would enable them? Because I am in the UK, I do have power in terms of my voice, in terms of I had that, my life savings to invest. I've got this level of privilege that I need to use. I need to advocate on behalf of all the people that can't do that. Frankly, it is my responsibility as a parent and an adult on this earth to look after all the children that are currently suffering, but also all of the future ones. I'm deeply conscious and about the world that is coming for my children and potentially grandchildren. And it's not okay for me just to think about the future. I think it's really, really important to also acknowledge there is a huge amount of climate change already happening in particularly in developing countries. But yeah, this is definitely something that gives me hope. It's something that I want to get my children involved in, get local schools involved in, the community involved in, because I think sometimes you can feel either that you're a drop in the ocean or that it's such a big problem that it's difficult to get your arms around. So actually planting a tree, if you take that into schools, and we'll be doing that with my little kids' schools in the spring, it's just a lovely, it's a very physical, concrete, tangible thing for a child to know that they've put something in the ground, they can see it grow. Millionaire Pledge plants a lot in developing countries, but we do some planting in the UK as well. And I think just to see that happen, I don't know when the last time you were in a forest or if you've ever planted your own trees and watched them grow. I know Sam's got a lovely story about sort of he used to capture conkers, didn't he? And he chucked one in the parents' rockery, and it grew, and it's genuinely grown into a horse chestnut tree. 40 years later, it's like, wow, trees are awesome. I mean, they are pretty cool. Nature is our biggest ally in fighting climate change if we can just stop getting in its way quite so much. So I think there's lots of positivity in there around the positive action of doing something, whatever scale you can do it at, of feeling like you're contributing, of taking responsibility and just not feeling disempowered or lost in the situation, and of swarming and feeling part of something, which is what I love about my little collective forest, because, you can have your own little thing. All my friends are planting their own forests, and sort of Christmas is coming, going, get your friends and family to plant some more copses of 25 trees, Don't just buy more cheap consumerist plastic from China. How about some trees? I don't know, just putting it out there. Anti-consumerist Christmas. I'm going to probably be the least popular mother in the world. Like, what do you get me for Christmas, Mum? Yeah, trees for the forest kids. But it is really important. It's difficult to explain sometimes to the kids how important it is. But I think as adults, I'm looking that bit ahead, and this is the decisive decade, and it is now that we have an opportunity to do something really proactive. So hence me stepping forward.
Yeah, and it's so inspiring. And I think, it's inspiring, but at the same time, there's sort of the fear and the terror of this being the most decisive decade, because I've been reading Jonathan Porritt's book, Hope in Hell, which very, very much talks about this. And he points out quite clearly, I was having similar thoughts myself, that we've got 8 years left to halve global emissions. Well, that means we need to cut emissions by around sort of 6.5% a year. Now, as Bill Gates points out in his book, the global emissions dropped by 5% in 2020 when we shut everything down. So we need to do something more substantial every year for the next 8 years, which, coming out of COP from the world leaders' perspective, and it just seemed to me that there was complete self-interest with coal and fossil fuels and so on, that it's not going to happen unless we do something. So something quite empowering. I was speaking to a couple of friends yesterday, Tom and Vanita, that run Whole Grain Digital, and they're two of my green heroes. And they said, actually, in some ways, they think there is, if COP26 seemed like a success, they worry, like a big success, they'd worry that lots of the population would start resting on their laurels and go, well, that's sorted then. And actually, in some ways, maybe history will look back and say, well, because it wasn't as good as it could be, or nowhere near as good as it could be, that empowered a mass movement. And there's something, I don't know, just really powerful about a collective of people coming together. And like you say, whether the hummingbird analogy, everyone doing their bit, but also everyone sort of not just doing a sort of token bit, but what's the most they can do that's inspiring? What's a bold thing? And it starts with, you putting most of your entire life savings in. You hear these stories of people just going above and beyond. And even if people say, well, I don't feel comfortable putting my entire life savings, I'm not in that position, but they might do a lot more than they would have done otherwise. And the thing I think that's really amazing about your mission to get 1 million small businesses to zero by 2025 is that the big oil tanker businesses are looking over their shoulder and going, well, gosh, if these guys are doing it, if we've got small businesses planting 1 million trees and small businesses racing and getting to net zero and doing all of this stuff, it then puts the pressure on them to go, gosh, well, if these guys can do it, what on earth is stopping us?
I think there's something interesting about ambition, isn't there, and scale. Like, as soon as Sam said what he was doing with 1 million trees, that sort of blew my mind for a second. I almost couldn't quite get my head around it. I mean, like, if I was trying to get the kids to visualize a forest with 1 million trees in it at the weekend. We were trying to imagine how many trees are in, like, the Forest of Dean, which is our nearest forest. And then we were trying to work out if one day by solar powered boat or by a very long bike ride we could get to Madagascar and Mozambique to see the forest that we're planting. And it would just be such an incredible thing to have done, to have planted a forest. I mean, wow.
Yeah, an incredible legacy to leave, right?
The lungs of the earth, right? Like, I can almost like visualize the lungs of the earth, like sucking down the carbon. It just feels pretty epic, actually. I don't know how it's going to feel, and I don't know what to say. It sort of blows my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I still. And actually, it's a question I always ask everyone about how hopeful are you on the climate crisis? But I want to sort of just before that sort of position it, because I thought this is more of a hopeful discussion than some other ones I've had with other people. But I sort of was daydreaming earlier this year. So my grandmother passed away quite sadly, but she was 99, so she had a good life. And I thought, gosh, when I get to 99 in 2083, what's the world I want to see? If I'm lucky enough to get to 99. I'd love there to be a headline saying we've done it, like parts per million of CO2 are back down to pre-industrial levels. So we've sucked out sort of 2.5 trillion tons of CO2. 3 billion trees have been planted over the last 60 years, putting the number of trees and natural forests back to what they were 500 years ago. And these sort of headlines, just obviously they're quite fanciful, but it is possible. It's unlikely with the current trajectory, but it's possible. And you think, well, that would be amazing if by the time we got to the end of the century, you and I, Laura, are sort of in our 90s, doing this as holograms.
Away. A rug over my knees.
Yeah, but we're sort of like we're sitting there with that contentment to the end of our lives that we did it, and there are all these future generations that will say, yeah, these guys inherited a mess from the 20th century, and it was a mess that brought billions out of poverty, so fine, but they cleaned it up to create a sustainable, habitable planet for us to thrive and have at least the same sort of standard of living, if not like just a fair one, and it goes on. And I just love that idea of when we get there, what will we be thinking? Have
you seen that lovely movie 2040?
I have, yeah. No, it's nice.
I mean, I remember watching that and just feeling, because when we studied at Cambridge, the first module was kind of pretty dark. Actually, it was taking you through the science and it was taking you through what was happening around the world, and just really waking you up to, guys, this is the crisis, this is how urgent it is. And then as part of module 2, it's sort of getting your head around the solutions, and 2040 articulated so many of the brilliant solutions. And I think that was the first time I came across initiatives like Project Drawdown and Rethink X, and there was just some fantastic minds. You can tell there's these really smart people who are seeking to amplify and scale all the solutions that are out there, saying, look, it's not like we're hurtling towards the edge of the cliff and we don't realize it. We do realize it. We have the science, it's pouring in on a day-to-day basis. You almost have like so much, it's a bit of an avalanche. And part of what I see my task is to distill a real thin slice for small businesses to say, right, let's make it very simple and allow you to quite cleanly kind of cut through and build as you sail, almost like you don't need to know all the answers in order to set sail. You can get 40-50% of them on a fag packet. That's a terrible analogy, but like literally a fag packet sketch of where your emissions probably lie and how you can offset them across the key buckets in energy, transport, buildings, procurement and waste. You can think that through and crack on with it, and then build in the rigor and if you want to go in depth and look more analytically at your carbon footprint, you can do all of that stuff. If you look at Project Drawdown, that's a great start point. If you listen to the documentaries from Sir David Attenborough, from Johan Rockström, they're based on really reliable science, but they're all pointing towards action that we can take, consciousness that we can raise, ways to educate, ways to get involved. And then, when I look back at COP, the things that really stole the show for me were the youth activists. So people like Clover Hogan from Force of Nature. I thought the Fridays for Future March was like this sea of children, was so calm that I didn't get to go. I had to take the kit back, but my colleague went, and it was just peaceful, but very optimistic, because it was empowering all these young people who have a massive stake in what's going on, to take take action, to voice what they're thinking, and to raise their sense of emergency. So I think the creativity, and I was just reflecting as you were talking about your daydreaming, and I know there's lovely exercises in that Good Ancestor book that we often talk about. And it was always making me think, I've heard, Force of Nature's big installation at COP was Call Your Mother, and it was about Mother Earth and about people just almost reconnecting with a sense of separateness or a fragmented break in their relationship with nature. It's like we've become so sucked into all our creature comforts and all our convenient ways of living and all our need for instant gratification and technology, that we've slightly cut ourselves off from actually the beautiful, restorative, calming, healing effects of nature. But if you look at where people wanted to escape to during lockdown, during COVID, and go on holiday, where did they end up? They all went to the beach, into the forest. They all revert to nature, because we know it has this incredibly intrinsic relationship to us that is restorative and really beneficial to our mental and physical well-being. So I do feel hope, in the sense that I think if you ask people what's the one place that you cherish, everybody would have a natural place they want to cherish. You can say, okay, don't try and get your arms around the whole world, just focus on that one place. I think people are starting to appreciate and value nature as a result of COVID and lockdown. And so they're spending more time going out walking. Well, I hope not everyone, but I think a lot of people have rediscovered their connection and love of the earth. And I think that idea of Dear Mum, of like, write a letter to your mum, to Mother Earth, and just reflect on what are all the benefits, what gratitude do you have, what do you appreciate about the natural world. There'll be some place that is a sweet memory for you. It might have been a fantastic holiday that you went on, or a place you go to when you're just stressed out of your tiny mind, or somewhere from your childhood. There will be somewhere that you value, and just think about all the things that gives you, and then get involved in something to do with that. If it was the sea, get involved in planting sea kelp. If it was the forest, come and join the Millionaire Pledge, or come and jump in my forest. Wherever it was, there is going to be something positive you can do. And my biggest hope is that with the kids screaming about it every Friday now, that people will come back into relationship with Mother Earth, with this sense of, this is important, this is our planet. We're not trying to save the planet here. The planet will evolve. We're trying to save human beings being able to exist in the environment, the climate that we're creating. But be very clear that the earth will go on irrespective, and it will rebalance itself. Whether or not we stay alive on that planet is is the issue that we seem to slightly get mixed up at times. So I think come back into relationship with Mother Earth, with nature. Go and watch some of those fantastic. Sir David Attenborough is like your go-to guy for really plugging back into what you love about the natural world, and then get stuck in. Just pick one thing and that you love and go and protect it. Job's a good one. You're already on a path to doing the maximum that you can do. If you want to get involved in the Millionaire Pledge, that would be awesome. But we don't expect everyone to do that. That's be like a little chain of dominoes. I feel like we're slowly building like one of those amazing little pathways through a warehouse with like a million dominoes in it, and then someone's gonna tip it at some point, and it'll cascade into this amazing good viral thing.
Well, especially given that the second part of the pledge is to find at least 2 other pledges. I think James from Thrive Accountants that joined us earlier this year described it as a leafy Ponzi scheme, but a good Ponzi scheme. Well, that made me chuckle, but it's true. There will be a critical mass. I think there's 30 confirmed, there's about 20 in the pipeline who are sort of thinking about it. But I think once we get to sort of 50 or 100 pledges, I think we'll start getting that critical mass. And once we have 100 organizations and people off telling their customers and their networks about it, it won't be too long for that to get to 200 and then 400 and continue to sort of compound and speed up that way. So I just want to wrap up by sort of asking that someone's watching this, they're inspired, they're excited. There'll be some people that want to donate to your collective forest. So perhaps you could direct them to that somehow. So I can put a link in the description. And if they're a smaller business that perhaps aren't ready to take the pledge yet, but want to get involved with your getting 1 million businesses to net zero by 2025, what's the best way to get in touch and how can they get involved?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a couple of routes. So Ecology very kindly set up a way where you can just sign up either as a one-off payment, or you can set up a monthly payment if you want to offset emissions. You can offset as well as plant trees. But if you set up your own little forest on Ecology and tell me, so email me, lauragr@glowinnovation.com, we can link your little child forest into my parent forest. So you become part of the big collective action that's going to get to 1 million trees planted by 2030. If you don't want to sign up to Ecology at all, that's fine. You could just do a one-off tree planting thing, and it could be anything from 25 copse of 25 trees up to 1,000 trees, up to some people have planted 10,000 trees. My goodness. Thank you so much. And that's just I'll put the link to my Ecology profile into the chat. You click on there and you'll find a button that just says gift more impact, and then you press on the trees only bit and decide, I want 25 trees, 100 trees, whatever it is, and then you're in the forest with your little name. And you can always click on it and then see, that's my forest, and it tracks. It will show you where in the world exactly you planted them, and over time you can sort of see how they're growing and how much carbon's being sequestered, and maybe one day even go and visit it. Obviously not in an aeroplane, by or by bicycle.
Yes, one day. Brilliant. Well, look, we're just over the half-an-hour mark, so I'm gonna say goodbye now. But thank you so much for giving your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sharing what you're doing. It's super inspiring, and hopefully others who watch us on social will find it the same. So thank you very much, Laura.
You're very welcome. Thanks for spending the time.